I stopped speaking to my son years ago, and he believes I did it to punish him. Ethan tells people I chose silence because I'm
How
cold.
can you just sit there and not
because
say
I
a
wanted
single
him to
word?
suffer the
After
way he
everything
once
we
hurt
talked
me.
about, you're just gonna ignore me again.
He's carried that
I
belief
deserve an
into
answer.
adulthood,
Look,
into
I've
every
tried,
relationship,
but she won't say
into
anything,
every
okay?
broken piece of his life.
What do you want me to do?
But the truth, I didn't choose silence. I lost my voice the night everything changed. The night my son did something he doesn't even remember. And I've been protecting him from that truth ever since. If you've ever misunderstood someone you love or been misunderstood yourself, stay with me. Before we go any further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It really helps stories like mine reach people who need them. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now where you are? Before silence took over my life, my home used to be filled with something far louder than words. Laughter. My name is Peter Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I worked as a nurse in a small hospital just outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. Long shifts, aching feet, the quiet satisfaction of helping someone breathe easier, hurt a little less, or simply feel seen in their worst moments. I learned early that not all healing requires speaking. Sometimes it's in the way you hold someone's hand. Sometimes it's in the way you stay. I think that's why even before everything changed, I was never the loudest person in the room. But I wasn't silent either. Back then, I had a voice. A soft one maybe, but it carried love in ways my son always understood. Ethan Whitmore was my whole world. His father, Richard, passed away when Ethan was just 9 years old. A sudden heart attack on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. One moment, we were arguing over whether he should cut back on coffee. The next, I was holding his hand in an emergency room I knew too well, only this time, I wasn't the nurse. I was the wife being told there was nothing more they could do. After that day, it was just Ethan and me, and I made a promise to myself in that sterile hospital hallway with fluorescent lights buzzing above me and grief pressing down on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I would be enough for him. I had to be. So I worked extra shifts. I packed his lunches before sunrise. I stayed up late helping him with homework even when my eyes burned from exhaustion. I learned how to fix leaky faucets, how to check tire pressure, how to be both the comfort he needed and the discipline he sometimes resisted. But more than anything, I listened. Ethan was a sensitive child, the kind who noticed when I was tired, even when I tried to hide it. The kind who would sit at the kitchen table swinging his legs, telling me about his day in a stream of words that barely paused for breath. "Mom, guess what happened today?" "No, wait, you're not going to believe this." "Okay, so Mr. Collins." He used to talk so fast I'd laugh and hold up a hand. "Slow down, honey. I'm right here." And he would grin. Always that grin. Bright, open, full of trust. I know, Mom. That was our rhythm. I listened. He spoke. But over time, something else began to happen. Something small, at first, almost unnoticeable. Ethan started speaking for me. It began in harmless ways. At the grocery store, if a cashier asked a question, Ethan would answer before I could. "She means yes." Or at parent-teacher conferences, when a teacher asked for my opinion, Ethan would jump in with an enthusiastic explanation of what he thought I would say. My mom thinks I should take the advanced class. At first, I thought it was sweet. He was protective. Proud, even. Like he wanted the world to understand me the way he did. And in truth, I didn't mind. I wasn't someone who needed to dominate conversations. I was comfortable in the background, letting him shine. But looking back now, I think that was the beginning of something I didn't fully understand. Ethan didn't just speak for me. He believed he understood me completely. And maybe in a child's way he did. There were nights when we'd sit together on the worn-out couch in our living room, a blanket draped over both of us, watching old movies we'd seen 100 times. He'd lean his head against my shoulder, and I'd feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You don't have to say anything, Mom," he once whispered. "I know what you're thinking." I remember smiling and kissing the top of his head. What am I thinking then? That you love me. I didn't hesitate. I do. And that you're never gonna leave me. That one caught in my throat even back then. Never, I said softly. He believed me. And for a long time, I believed that was enough. As Ethan grew older, life became more complicated, as it always does. School pressures, friendships, the quiet competition that creeps into teenage years. But even then, we stayed close, closer than most mothers and sons people used to say. Ethan's such a good boy, my neighbors would tell me. You raised him right. I used to nod, smiling politely, but inside, I always thought the same thing. No, we raised each other. Because in many ways, he kept me going just as much as I kept him safe. There were moments, small, fleeting ones, when I noticed a shift. Like the time he rolled his eyes when I asked too many questions about his friends, or the first time he sighed impatient when I didn't respond quickly enough in a conversation. Mom, you take forever to say anything. He didn't mean it harshly. Not then. He laughed right after nudging me playfully. I'm just kidding. But I remember that moment, because for the first time, I felt something I couldn't quite name. A distance. Not a big one. Not yet. Just a step back. Still, life went on. We adapted. We always did. I continued working at the hospital, picking up shifts whenever I could. Ethan focused on school, on building a future that felt bigger than the small town we lived in. And I encouraged that. I wanted him to leave, to explore, to become more than the boy who once sat at our kitchen table telling me every detail of his day. But I never imagined that leaving would also mean letting go of us. Back then, though, we were still intact. Still a team. Still mother and son in the simplest, purest sense. We didn't know how fragile that bond could be. We didn't know how one night, just one, could change everything. If I had known, I wonder if I would have held on a little tighter. Or maybe I already did. And it still wasn't enough. The first time I realized I was losing my son, there was no argument, no slammed doors, no dramatic goodbye. It was quieter than that. It happened in a phone call that lasted less than 3 minutes. Ethan had just started his first semester at the University of Michigan. I still remember the excitement in his voice the week before he left, the way he walked through the house like everything suddenly felt too small for him. I'm finally getting out, Mom, he said, half laughing, half breathless. It feels like everything's starting. I smiled, even though my chest tightened in a way I didn't want him to see. That's how it's supposed to feel, and I meant it. I had spent years preparing him for that moment, teaching him independence, encouraging him to dream bigger than our little town, telling him over and over that he didn't have to stay for me. Still, when the day came and I stood in the driveway watching his car disappear down the street, I realized something no one warns you about. Letting go is never as clean as you imagine. At first, we talked often, every night, sometimes twice a day. He told me about his classes, his professors, the campus food he claimed was barely edible. I listened, just like I always had, smiling into the phone, picturing him navigating this new world. But slowly, something shifted. The calls became shorter, then less frequent, then optional. Hey, Mom, I can't talk long. I'm heading out. Sorry, I've got a study group. I'll call you later, okay? Later rarely came. I told myself it was normal, that this was what growing up looked like, that he needed space to become his own person. And I respected that. But respect doesn't make the silence easier. One evening, about 2 months into his first semester, I called him after my shift ended. It was late, almost 10 p.m., and I debated for a long time before dialing. I didn't want to interrupt his life. I didn't want to be that mother, but I missed him. When he answered, there was loud music in the background. Laughter. Voices I didn't recognize. "Hey, Mom." His tone was different, distracted. "Hi, honey. I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "I'm good," he said quickly. "Everything's good." There was a pause. I waited, expecting him to fill it the way he used to. He didn't. I was thinking about that class you mentioned," I said gently. "The one you weren't sure about." "Mom," he cut in a little sharper this time. "It's fine. I figured it out." Another pause. Longer. More uncomfortable. "Okay," I said quietly. In the background, a girl's voice called out, "Ethan, come on!" He didn't mute the phone. "I gotta go," he said. "Of course," I replied quickly, even though he hadn't given me a chance to say anything else. "Have fun." "Yeah, night, Mom." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, holding the phone in my hand, listening to the silence that followed. It wasn't the first time our conversations had felt different, but it was the first time I felt like I was no longer part of his world. A week later, I met her, Chloe Sanders. Ethan brought her home for Thanksgiving, and from the moment she stepped into my house, I could tell she was the kind of person who filled every space she entered. Confident, polished, the kind of young woman who spoke with certainty even when she didn't know you yet. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, smiling brightly, extending her hand before I could even step forward. "I've heard so much about you." Her grip was firm, her eyes quick, observant. I smiled back, nodding politely. Ethan stood beside her, one hand resting casually on her back. "This is Chloe," he said, like I hadn't already guessed. "She's amazing, Mom. Top of her class business major already has an internship lined up." There was pride in his voice. But it wasn't the kind I was used to hearing. It wasn't warm. It was performative, as if he needed me to be impressed. "She sounds wonderful," I said softly. Chloe laughed lightly. "Oh, I try," she said. "Ethan's the real genius, though. He just doesn't give himself enough credit." I looked at him expecting that familiar smile. Instead, he shrugged. "Yeah, well, I'm figuring things out." We sat down for dinner, and for the first time in years, I felt like a guest at my own table. Chloe did most of the talking. She spoke about her plans, her goals, her expectations for the future, about networking internships, the importance of positioning yourself correctly. Ethan listened, nodding along, occasionally adding a comment that sounded rehearsed. When I tried to ask him anything, he answered quickly, then turned the conversation back to her. At one point, I asked, "Are you still enjoying your literature class?" It used to be his favorite. He barely looked at me. I dropped it. "Oh," I said, surprised. "I thought you loved—" "It wasn't practical," Chloe cut in smoothly. "We've been talking about focusing on things that actually lead somewhere." There was something in the way she said "actually" that made my chest tighten. I nodded slowly. "Of course." Ethan didn't correct her. He didn't look at me. He just reached for his glass, taking a sip like the conversation didn't matter. Later that night, after Chloe went to bed, I found him in the kitchen. Alone. For a moment, I saw him again. The boy who used to sit at that same table telling me everything. "Ethan," I said, gently. He glanced up. "Yeah, I miss talking to you." The words came out quieter than I intended. He sighed, leaning back against the counter. "Mom, we are talking." "No," I said softly, "not like before." He shook his head, a small, impatient motion. "That's because the Ings are different now." "Different how?" He sighed, leaning back against the counter. "Mom, we are talking." "No," I said softly, "not like before." He shook his head, a small, impatient motion. "That's because things are different now. Different how I'm not a kid anymore." "I know that," I said quickly. You just what? He interrupted. Want everything to stay the same? His tone wasn't angry. It was worse, dismissive. I want to understand you, I said. You don't have to, he replied. I've got it. Those words hit me harder than he probably realized, because once that had been my role, to understand him, to listen, to be the place he came back to. Now he didn't think he needed that anymore, and maybe in his world, he didn't. Okay, I whispered. He nodded like the conversation was over. And in that moment, standing in my own kitchen, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit. My son didn't just grow up. He moved on. And somewhere along the way, he started seeing me not as someone who understood him, but as someone who held him back. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just stepped back. Because sometimes, and somewhere along the way, he started seeing me not as someone who understood him, but as someone who held him back. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just stepped back. Because sometimes, love looks like letting someone walk away even when every part of you wants to hold on. I just didn't know then how far he was willing to go, or how deeply he would misunderstand the silence that would come after. If you had asked me back then what the worst night of my life would look like, I would have said it was the night Richard died. I was wrong, because nothing prepares you for the moment when the person you love most becomes the reason your life changes forever. And the cruelest part, they don't even remember it. It was late October, the kind of night where the rain doesn't just fall. It presses against the windows, relentless like it's trying to get inside. I had just finished a double shift at the hospital. My body ached, my feet throbbed, and all I wanted was to sit down with a cup of tea and hear Ethan talk about his day. He was 17 then, old enough to drive, young enough to still need me, or so I believed. When I walked through the front door, I knew something was wrong immediately. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Heavy quiet. Ethan, I called out. No answer. I set my keys down slowly, listening. Then I heard a muffled sound from upstairs. Movement. Something being knocked over. My heart tightened. Ethan. I moved toward the stairs, faster this time, a familiar sense of urgency kicking in, the same instinct I relied on at the hospital when something didn't feel right. When I reached his room, the door was half open, and what I saw inside, I will never forget. His backpack was on the floor, contents spilled everywhere. A chair knocked over, his desk drawer hanging open, and Ethan. He was pacing, back and forth, his hands gripping his hair, his breathing uneven. Ethan, I said softly, stepping into the room. What happened? He froze. For a split second, he looked like a little boy again. Then panic took over. I messed up, he said. Mom, I messed up. I moved closer, keeping my voice calm, steady, the way I had done for countless patients. Okay? It's okay. Just tell me what happened. He shook his head, pacing again. I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't mean to. What didn't you mean to do? I borrowed your car. My stomach dropped. You borrowed. Ethan, you know you're not supposed to. I know, he snapped. I know. Chloe needed me, and I didn't think. Of course. Chloe, what happened? I asked again, more firmly this time. There was a turn, he said quickly, words spilling out. The road was wet, and I couldn't see properly, and there was another car, and His voice broke. I hit something. The room felt like it tilted. Are you hurt? No. Was anyone else hurt? I don't think so. I don't know. I didn't stop. The words hung in the air. You didn't stop. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Ethan, I said carefully. We need to go back. No, he said immediately. No, I can't. Mom, you don't understand if they find out. If they find out what I pressed. That I was driving without permission. That I panicked. That I ran. His voice dropped to a whisper. My life is over. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. No, I said firmly. Your life is not over. But running away from this won't fix anything. You don't get it, he snapped, pulling away. I've worked for this mom, college, everything. If this comes out, Ethan? I interrupted, my voice sharper now. Listen to me. He stopped, just for a moment. You made a mistake, I said. A serious one. But we deal with it. Together. He looked at me, eyes wide, desperate. You don't understand what this will do to me. And you don't understand what leaving the scene could do to someone else. Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Then he shook his head. No, he said quietly. I'm not going back. Something inside me shifted. That moment, that exact moment, is burned. That exact moment is burned into my memory. Because it was the first time I saw not my son, but a boy afraid of consequences more than he cared about the truth. Get your jacket, I say-eyed. He stared at me. Mom. Now, Ethan, to my memory. Because it was the first time I saw not my son, but a boy afraid of consequences more than he cared about the truth. Get your jacket, I said. He stared at me. Mom. Now, Ethan. There was something in my voice he hadn't heard before. Not anger, not disappointment, authority. He hesitated, then grabbed his jacket. The drive back was silent, except for the sound of rain hitting the windshield and the steady rhythm of the wipers fighting to keep up. I drove. He sat beside me, staring straight ahead. Neither of us spoke. When we reached the intersection, he described my heart started pounding. There it was, a dented guardrail, skid marks on the road, but no other car, no ambulance, no police, nothing. Stay here, I said. I stepped out into the rain, the cold biting through my clothes instantly. I walked slowly toward the guardrail, scanning the area, my nurse's instincts on high alert. Please let no one be hurt. Please. I crouched down, examining the damage, trying to piece together what had happened. And then, headlights. Bright. Too fast. I turned. Everything after that happened in fragments. A horn blaring, tires screeching, the blinding flash of white light, and Ethan's voice. Mom! I remember stepping back. I remember losing my footing on the wet pavement. And then impact. Sharp, violent, final. For a moment, sharp, violent, final. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no pain, just darkness. Then distant noise. Voices. Shouting. Call 911. She's not breathing. Stay with me. Mom, can you hear me? And through it all, Ethan's voice. Breaking. Mom. Mom, please, there was nothing. No sound, no pain. Just darkness. Then distant noise. Voices. Shouting. Call 911. She's not breathing. Stay with me, ma'am. Can you hear me? And through it all, Ethan's voice. Breaking. Mom! Mom, please! Please! I wanted to answer him. I wanted to say, I'm here. I'm okay. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. just silence. The kind that doesn't end. The kind that takes everything with it. When I woke up, the world felt distant. Like I was underwater, everything muffled, slow, unreachable. There were lights above me, bright, sterile, too white. Machines beeped in steady rhythms. Something tugged at my arm. Something pressed against my throat. My throat. That was the first thing I felt clearly. Pain, sharp, deep, like something had been torn apart and stitched back together wrong. I tried to swallow. Fire. I tried to move. Heavy. Then I heard a voice. Peter. Can you hear me? A doctor. Calm, practiced, but with a careful edge, like someone preparing for something difficult. I forced my eyes open. Shapes blurred into focus. A man in a white coat. A nurse adjusting something beside me. And behind them, Ethan. His face was pale, eyes red, hands shaking. Mom, that one word broke something inside me. I tried to answer. I tried to say his name the way I always had, soft, reassuring, steady. Etha. Nothing came out. Not even a whisper. Just air. I frowned, confused, and tried again, pushing harder this time. Pain exploded through my throat. Still nothing. The doctor stepped closer. Peter, don't try to speak, he said gently. You've been through a severe trauma. I stared at him, not fully understanding. No, that wasn't right. I could speak. I always could. I opened my mouth again, more desperate now, trying to force even the smallest sound out. But the silence that came back to me was absolute, total, final. My hand moved instinctively to my throat, fingers brushing against bandages. The doctor hesitated. Then he said the words that changed everything. There was significant damage to your vocal cords. I froze. We had to perform emergency surgery to stabilize you, he continued, but the injury was extensive. My heart started racing. No, extensive. My heart started racing. No, that wasn't. You may not regain your ability to speak. The room went completely still. Even the machine seemed quieter. I looked at Ethan. He was staring at me like he was watching something break in real time. Mom, no, that wasn't. You may not regain your ability to speak. The room went completely still. Even the machines seemed quieter. I looked at Ethan. He was staring at me like he was watching something break in real time. Mom, he whispered again, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I wanted to tell him to stop, to breathe, to calm down, to say it wasn't his fault. But I couldn't, because I still didn't fully understand what had happened. Not yet. All I knew was that when I tried to speak, there was nothing there. The next few days passed in fragments. Doctors came and went. Tests were done. Results were explained slowly, carefully, like they were trying not to overwhelm me. But the truth didn't soften, no matter how gently they delivered it. The damage was real. Permanent, most likely. There were therapies, possibilities, small chances of partial recovery, but nothing certain. Nothing that promised I would ever sound like myself again. Or sound at all. Ethan stayed by my side. He barely left the room. He brought me water, adjusted my blankets, sat in silence for hours, his hands clasped tightly together, like he was holding himself in place. At first, I thought he was just scared. But then I started to notice something else. Guilt. It was in the way he avoided my eyes, the way he flinched whenever a doctor mentioned the accident, the way his voice trembled every time he said my name. Mom, I'm so sorry. He said it again and again, and slowly the pieces began to fall into place. The rain, the car, the intersection, his panic. He had been the one driving. He had caused the accident, and I had gone back for him. I closed my eyes, letting that realization settle. Not with anger, not with blame, but with something far more complicated. Love. Because even in that moment, lying in a hospital bed, my voice gone, my future uncertain, my first instinct wasn't to confront him. It was to protect him, just like I always had. That night, when the room was quiet, and Ethan had finally fallen asleep in the chair beside me, I reached for the notepad the nurse had left on the table. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. Writing felt strange at first, slower, less natural than speaking. But it worked, and for now, it was all I had. I looked at Ethan, at the boy who used to tell me everything, at the young man now carrying a weight he didn't fully understand. And I made a decision, one that would shape everything that came after. I would not tell him the truth, not like this. Not when he was already breaking under the weight of what he thought he had done. Because if he knew, if he truly understood that his panic, his mistake, had cost me my voice, it would destroy him. I knew my son. He wasn't heartless. He wasn't careless. He was afraid. And fear makes people do things they regret for the rest of their lives. I wouldn't let that regret define him. So I wrote the first lie. 4 simple words. This wasn't your fault. The next morning, when Ethan woke up, I handed him the note. He read it slowly, then again, and again. Tears filled his eyes. You don't have to say that, he whispered. I know I messed up. I shook my head, gently pointing to the note. He looked at it one more time, and something shifted in his expression. Relief. Small, fragile, but there. It hurt to see, because I knew what I was doing. I was giving him permission to let go of the truth. And once you do that, it becomes easier to build a different version of reality. A safer one. Over the next few days, I continued. When doctors asked about the accident, I wrote vague answers. It was raining. I slipped. I don't remember everything clearly. No one pushed too hard. They had seen worse, more complicated stories. Mine, by comparison, was simple enough to accept. And Ethan, he stopped asking. Slowly, the apologies became less frequent. The guilt softened, and in its place, something else began to grow. Something I didn't recognize at first. Distance. Because without the truth connecting us, we were no longer standing on the same ground. He thought he had hurt me, but not this much. He thought my silence was temporary, recoverable. He thought things would go back to normal, but they wouldn't, because I had made a choice to carry the truth alone. And sometimes, the heaviest burdens aren't the ones forced on us. They're the ones we choose. Silence didn't arrive all at once. It settled in slowly like dust you don't notice until everything feels dimmer. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, the house felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I had. Every sound seemed louder. The ticking clock in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wooden floor beneath my feet. And yet inside me, there was nothing. No voice. No instinct to call out, to respond, to fill the space the way I once had. Ethan carried my bags inside that day, moving carefully like I might break if he handled anything too roughly. "Watch your step," he said quietly as I walked through the doorway. I nodded. That became our new language. Nods, glances, small gestures. At first, he tried. He really did. "Do you need anything?" he asked, hovering near the kitchen doorway. I reached for the notepad I had started carrying with me everywhere. "Water." He nodded quickly and turned to get it, almost relieved to have something to do. But there were things I couldn't write fast enough. Things that didn't translate well onto paper. Emotion, reassurance, love. You don't realize how much of communication lives in tone until tone is taken away from you. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And slowly I began to notice a shift in Ethan. Not the guilt anymore that had faded just like I intended, but something else. Frustration. It showed up in small ways at first. The way he sighed when I took too long to write something down. The way he checked his phone while waiting for me to respond. The way conversations, if you could call them that, started to feel one-sided. One afternoon, I tried to ask him about school. I wrote carefully, making sure my handwriting was clear. "How are your classes?" He glanced at the paper, then shrugged. "They're fine." I waited. He didn't say anything else, so I wrote again. "Are you still thinking about business?" This time, he exhaled sharply. "Yeah, Mom. I told you, I'm focusing on what actually matters now." That word again. Actually. I stared at the paper in my hands, then slowly looked up at him. He was already walking away. "Gotta go," he said. "Chloe's picking me up." I watched him leave the door, closing behind him with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have. Chloe. She became a constant presence in his life, and soon in mine. At first she was polite, respectful even, but there was always something underneath her tone, something subtle, something that made me feel like I was being observed, evaluated, measured. One evening, she sat across from me at the dinner table watching as I carefully wrote out a response to something Ethan had said. "You know," she began casually, twirling her fork between her fingers. "This must be really hard for Ethan." I paused. Looked up. She smiled slightly. "I mean, having to do all the talking, all the explaining, it's a lot of pressure." Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Chloe, I'm just saying," she continued smoothly. "Communication is important, and when one person can't contribute, it kind of throws everything off." Her eyes flicked to me. Just for a second. But it was enough. I lowered my gaze back to the notepad, my fingers tightening around the pen. Ethan didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He just sat there, silent. And in that moment, I realized something that hurt more than losing my voice. He was starting to believe it. The idea that my silence was a burden, that I was less. Later that night, I tried to talk to him. I waited until Chloe left, until the house was quiet again. Then I found him in the living room. I wrote slowly, choosing each word carefully. "I'm still me." I turned the notepad toward him. He read it, then frowned slightly. "I know that, Mom." "Do you?" I wrote next. He hesitated. "Of course I do." But there was uncertainty in his voice, and something else. Impatience. "It's just..." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "Things are different now. Okay?" Different. I nodded slowly. Yes, they were, but not in the way he thought. Because to him, my silence was something I had chosen. Something I could end if I wanted to. And that belief, it changed everything. A few weeks later, the misunderstanding took its first real shape. We were sitting at the kitchen table. He had just come home from school, clearly irritated about something. "Can you just say something?" he snapped suddenly. I froze. He gestured toward me, frustration spilling over. This whole thing, the writing, the waiting, it's exhausting." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "I mean, what did I even do that was so bad?" He continued, his voice rising. "Why are you still doing this? Doing this? Like it was a punishment. Like it was intentional." I reached for the notepad, my hands shaking slightly. "It's not," but I stopped. Because how do you explain something like this without unraveling everything? How do you tell your son that his mistake cost you your voice? Without placing that weight back onto his shoulders. I looked up at him, at the frustration in his eyes, at the distance growing between us. And I made the same choice I had made in the hospital. I stayed silent. He laughed bitterly. "Yeah, that's what I thought." He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. "You know what, fine. If this is how you want it, then whatever." He walked out, and this time the silence he left behind felt different, colder, heavier, because now it wasn't just mine, it was his too. From that day on, something changed permanently between us. He stopped trying to understand, stopped asking questions, stopped looking at me like I was someone he needed to connect with. Instead, he started seeing me as someone who had shut him out, someone who chose silence over him. And the cruelest part? Every time he looked at me that way, I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell him everything. But I couldn't. Not because I didn't have the words, but because I had already made my choice. And sometimes, love means living with the consequences of your silence, even when it breaks the very thing you were trying to protect. Distance doesn't always happen with a single decision. Sometimes it builds quietly, layer by layer, until one day you look around and realize there's nothing left holding you together. After that argument in the kitchen, something inside Ethan hardened. Not all at once, but enough. He stopped waiting for my responses, stopped asking questions that required more than a yes or no, stopped trying to meet me halfway. Instead, he adjusted his life around my silence, and eventually away from it. At first, it was small things. He ate dinner in his room instead of at the table. He left earlier in the mornings, came home later at night. If I wrote something to him, he would glance at it quickly, sometimes not even finishing the sentence before responding with a short, distracted answer. "Yeah. Okay. Fine." 3 words that slowly replaced everything we used to be. I told myself it was temporary, that he was just busy, that school Chloe life, it was all overwhelming, and he needed time. But deep down, I knew better. I had seen this kind of withdrawal before. Not in my own life, but in the hospital. Patients who stopped fighting. Families who stopped trying. People who little by little let go. The difference was, I didn't know how to stop it. Because I couldn't speak. And somehow, that made everything feel permanent. One evening, I heard him on the phone in the living room. I hadn't meant to listen. But when you live in silence, every sound becomes impossible to ignore. "It's just hard, you know," Ethan said, his voice low but tense. A pause. Chloe's voice came through faintly from the other end. "Hard how?" He exhaled. "She doesn't talk. Like at all. It's not even temporary anymore." My hand froze on the edge of the doorway. "I have to guess what she's thinking all the time," he continued. "And if I get it wrong, she just looks at me, or writes something later." Another pause. "Yeah," he added, quieter now. "Sometimes It feels like she's doing it on purpose. That sentence hit me like a physical blow. On purpose. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. I mean, I know she got hurt, he went on quickly. But it's been months. If she wanted to try harder, she could. Try harder. I closed my eyes, because in his mind, this was still a choice, a decision I was making every single day. Not a loss, not a consequence, not something that had been taken from me, something I was withholding. I just don't get why she won't talk to me, he said finally. There it was, the misunderstanding fully formed, not confusion, not doubt, belief. And once belief takes root, it's harder to undo than any truth. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the notepad in front of me, pen in hand. I could fix this. I knew I could. All I had to do was tell him. Write everything down. The accident, the surgery, the truth. He would understand. Of course he would. He was my son. But then I pictured his face in that hospital room. The guilt, the fear, the way his voice broke when he said, "I'm so sorry." If I told him now, it wouldn't just explain my silence. It would reopen everything. It would place the weight back where I had worked so hard to remove it. And this time, it would be heavier. Because now, he had built a life on the belief that things weren't that bad, that what happened wasn't permanent, that he hadn't truly caused something irreversible. I stared at the blank page. The pen hovered just above it, and then slowly I set it down. Because I had already made my choice, and I wasn't strong enough to undo it. The next week, Ethan told me he was moving out. He didn't sit me down, didn't ease into it. He just said it standing in the doorway like it was a simple fact. "I found a place closer to campus," he said. "Chloe and I are splitting rent." I nodded. Of course they were. "It just makes more sense," he added almost defensively. "Less commuting. More independence. Independence." I picked up the notepad. "Are you sure?" He glanced at it. "Yeah." A pause. Then softer. "It's probably better this way." Better. I swallowed, forcing my hand to stay steady as I wrote again. "You're always welcome here." He looked at the words for a moment longer this time, then nodded. "I know." But there was something missing in his voice. Not reassurance, not gratitude, just acknowledgement. Like the statement didn't mean much anymore. The day he left, I stood in the same driveway where I had once watched him drive off to college. But this time, it felt different. Final. He loaded his car quickly, efficiently, like he didn't want to linger. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. When he finished, he walked over to me. For a second, I thought he might hug me, might say something real, something honest. But instead, he just nodded. "I'll call you," he said. I smiled faintly, nodded back, and just like that, he was gone. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not the silence inside me, but the silence around me. No footsteps upstairs, no late-night conversations, no presence filling the space. Just emptiness. Days passed, then weeks. The calls he promised became texts. Short, infrequent, busy today. No late-night conversations, no presence filling the space. Just emptiness. Days passed, then weeks. The calls he promised became texts. Short, infrequent, busy today. talk later. I'm fine. Fine. That word again. I replied when I could. Simple messages. Take care. Eat well. Love you. Sometimes he responded. Sometimes he didn't. But I never stopped writing. Because even if he didn't read every word, I needed him to know I was still there. Still listening. Still loving him. Even in silence. Especially in silence. But the truth was, the further he moved away from me, the easier it became for him to believe his version of the story. That I had chosen this. That I had chosen to stop talking to him. That I had chosen distance. And the more he believed it, the less he came back. Until one day, he stopped coming back at all. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I had just finished watering the plants by the kitchen window. One of the few routines I had managed to hold on to after everything changed. The sunlight was soft that day, filtering through the glass in a way that made the dust particles look almost beautiful. For a moment, everything felt still, manageable. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Ethan. My heart reacted before my mind did. It had been weeks since he last called. Not texted, not sent a short dismissive message, but actually called. My hands trembled as I picked up. I pressed the phone to my ear. Silence. Then, it had been weeks since he last called. Not texted, not sent a short dismissive message, but actually called. My hands trembled as I picked up. I pressed the phone to my ear. Silence. Then Mom. His voice sounded different, not distant, not irritated, shaken. I couldn't answer. Of course I couldn't. But I leaned into the phone anyway as if somehow he could feel me there. Mom. He stopped, exhaled sharply. I don't even know why I'm calling. Another pause. Longer this time. Then softer. I think I messed up. My chest tightened. That sentence. It echoed something from the past. Something buried deep. Something I had tried to protect him from remembering. I lost my job, he said. The words came out quickly, like he wanted to get them over with. They said I wasn't focused, that I missed deadlines, that I wasn't reliable. I closed my eyes. Ethan had always been responsible, careful, driven. This wasn't like him. There's more, he added quietly. Of course there was. There's always more, he muttered almost to himself. Chloe, she left. The silence between us shifted. He let out a hollow laugh. Guess I wasn't practical enough after all. Something inside me ached at the bitterness in his voice. I wanted to tell him that people who speak like Chloe often mistake control for strength. That real life doesn't follow clean plans. That failure isn't the end. But all I had was silence. I don't even know why I'm telling you this, he said again. You probably don't care. That one hurt more than the rest, because it meant that somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that my silence meant indifference, that not speaking meant not feeling. I reached for the notepad, flipping it open with urgency, but he couldn't see me, couldn't read my words, couldn't know that I was trying. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't know who else to call. That was when I realized something. Despite everything, despite the distance, despite the misunderstanding that had grown between us, when his world started to fall apart, that was when I realized something. Despite everything, Despite the distance, despite the misunderstanding that had grown between us, when his world started to fall apart, he still reached for me. Not Chloe, not his friends, me. And that meant something. Anyway, he said, clearing his throat, trying to regain control. I'll figure it out. Of course he would say that. That's what people do when they're trying not to fall apart. I always do right, he added, but there was no confidence behind it, just emptiness. I pressed the pen harder against the paper, writing faster than I had in months. You don't have to do it alone. But he couldn't see it. I should go, he said. No, not yet, please, not yet. I just wanted to hear your voice, he admitted suddenly. The irony of that sentence nearly broke me. My throat tightened, not from injury this time, but from something deeper. Grief. Because he didn't know. He still thought I could give him that. Still thought my silence was something I was choosing. I guess that was stupid, he added quickly. No, it wasn't. It was the most honest thing he had said in a long time. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, as if I could somehow bridge the gap between us. I'll talk to you later, he said, and then quietly, bye, Mom. The line went dead. I stayed there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, the silence on the other end louder than anything I had ever heard. Because for the first time in months, he had needed me, and I couldn't reach him. Not the way he needed, not the way he understood. That afternoon, I made a decision. I drove to his apartment. It wasn't a long drive, just under an hour, but it felt like crossing into a different world. His world. When I arrived, the building looked tired, paint peeling near the entrance, a flickering light above the door. Nothing like the future Chloe used to talk about. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. For a moment, I considered leaving. Maybe he wasn't home. Maybe this was a mistake. Then the door opened. Ethan stood there, looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him. His hair was unkempt, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped in a way that made him look smaller. Younger, Mom. Surprise flickered across his face. What are you doing here? I lifted the notepad, wrote quickly, I came to see you. He stared at the words, then stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was messy, dishes in the sink, papers scattered across the table, clothes draped over the back of a chair. Not careless, just overwhelmed. He sat down heavily on the couch. I didn't expect you to actually show up, he said. I walked in slowly, taking in the space, then sat across from him. I wrote again. You called. He let out a quiet laugh. Yeah, I guess I did. A pause. Then you always do this. I looked up. He gestured toward me. You just show up, even when I don't ask you to. I tilted my head slightly, because in truth, he had asked. He just didn't realize it. I don't know what you expect me to say. He continued, frustration creeping back into his voice. You come all the way here, and then what? You just sit there? I lowered my gaze to the notepad, started writing. I'm here. He read it, scoffed lightly. That's not the same. No, it wasn't, but it was all I had. And for a moment, I saw it, the conflict in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to accept it, and the part that resisted. Because to accept it would mean admitting something else, that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't chosen this silence at all. That night in Ethan's apartment, we sat across from each other, like strangers trying to remember a language we once spoke fluently. The silence between us wasn't new, but the meaning behind it had changed. Before it had been full heavy with things unsaid, but still connected. Now it felt fractured, misunderstood. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, running both hands through his hair like he was trying to steady himself. "I don't know what you want me to do," he said finally. I looked at him. Really looked. This wasn't the confident young man Chloe had shaped him into. This was my son. Tired shaped him into. This was my son. Tired, lost, trying to hold himself together with whatever strength he had left. I picked up the notepad again. "You don't have to do anything." He read it, his jaw tightening. "That's not helpful," he said. I paused, then wrote again, slower this time. "Just breathe." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, because that's gonna fix everything." I didn't react, didn't defend myself, didn't try to correct him, because in his world, words were still the solution to everything, and in mine, words had become something else entirely. "I lost everything, Mom," he said, his voice dropping. "My job. Chloe. The plan I thought I had." He gestured vaguely around the apartment. "This isn't what my life was supposed to look like." I nodded gently, because I understood that feeling more than he realized. Nothing had gone the way I planned either. Not the accident, not the silence, not the distance between us. Life doesn't ask for permission before it changes everything. I wrote again, "You're still here." He stared at the words, then shook his head. "That's not enough." I felt that one, deep, because once it had been enough. Being here, being together, that used to mean something, but now he needed more. More certainty, more control, more answers, and I couldn't give him those. "Why won't you just talk to me?" he asked suddenly. The question came out sharper this time, more desperate, more direct. My hand froze above the paper. "I don't mean like normal," he added quickly, gesturing awkwardly. "I know you had surgery. I know it's hard, but you don't even try." There it was. The belief again. Not can't, won't. I looked at him, my chest tightening. "I've seen people recover from worse," he continued. "At least they try to communicate. They push themselves. They don't just give up. Give up." The words echoed in my head, because if there was one thing I had never done, it was give up. But from where he stood, that's exactly what it looked like. I lowered my gaze, forcing my hand to move again. "I am trying." He read it. His expression didn't soften. "Then why does it feel like you're shutting me out?" I stopped writing, because that question I didn't have a safe answer for. If I told him the truth, everything would collapse. If I didn't, we would keep drifting. "I don't even know what you're thinking anymore," he said, quieter now. "You used to." "I don't know. I used to feel like you understood me." I looked up at him. I still do. The words burned inside me, but they stayed there, unspoken, unheard, unseen. Instead, I wrote something else. "I'm still here for you." He stared at the page for a long moment, then leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I know," he said. But his voice didn't carry belief, just acknowledgement. And that was the hardest part. Not anger, not frustration, but the quiet distance of someone who doesn't fully trust what you're giving them. We sat there for a while after that. No more questions. No more attempts to explain. Just presence. Eventually, he stood up. "I should probably clean this place," he said, glancing around. I nodded. He picked up a few dishes, moving them to the sink, but his movements were slow. Distracted. Like his mind was somewhere else. "Hey," he said after a moment, not turning around. I looked up. "Why did you come here today?" The question caught me off guard, because the answer felt so obvious to me and yet so complicated to explain. I wrote carefully. "Because you needed me." He turned then, looked at the words, really looked at them, and for the first time since I arrived, something shifted in his eyes. Not fully, not completely, but enough. "How would you even know that?" he asked quietly. I held his gaze, because I've always known. But I didn't write that. Instead, I just tapped the page gently. He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "That's not how it works anymore, Mom." No, it wasn't. Because he had stopped believing that I could understand him without words. And I had stopped trusting that words would fix anything. That was the space between us, not silence, but the meaning we attached to it. "I don't know what to do," he admitted suddenly, his voice softer now. There it was again. The honesty. The vulnerability he had been hiding behind frustration. I stood up slowly, walked over to him. For a second, he looked like he might step back. But he didn't. I reached out and gently placed my hand over his. He froze, then looked down at our hands, and something in him softened. Just a little. No words, no explanations, just contact. And in that moment, I felt it. The connection. Still there. Faint. Fragile. But not gone. Maybe not everything was lost. Maybe not yet. But as I stood there holding his hand, I also knew something else. This wouldn't be enough forever. Sooner or later, he would need the truth. And when that moment came, silence would no longer protect either of us. I stayed longer than I planned that night, long enough to watch Ethan move through the small, cluttered apartment, like someone trying to rebuild a life out of pieces that didn't quite fit anymore. He washed dishes that didn't need washing, rearranged papers without reading them, picked things up, put them down, then picked them up again, restless, unsettled, lost. I recognized that kind of movement. I had seen it in hospital rooms, in waiting areas, in families standing outside ICU doors. It's what people do when they're trying not to think too much, because thinking might break them. I sat quietly, letting him move, letting the space breathe. Eventually he stopped, leaning against the counter, staring at nothing in particular. "I thought I had everything figured out," he said suddenly. I looked up. "I really did," he continued. "I had a plan, a path. Chloe, she made everything feel like it was all lined up, you know?" He let out a bitter laugh. Like, if I just followed the right steps, everything would work out. I tilted my head slightly. Because I knew that illusion. We all believe it at some point. That life is something you can organize, control, predict. I guess I was wrong, he added quietly. I picked up the notepad, started writing. "Life doesn't follow plans." He read it. A faint smile touched his lips. "Yeah," he said. "I'm starting to see that." A pause. Then he looked at me again, more directly this time. "When did you figure that out?" The question caught me off guard, because the answer was simple. The night everything changed. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. So I wrote something else, a long time ago. He nodded slowly. Must be nice, he muttered. Nice. I almost smiled at that, because there was nothing nice about learning that lesson the way I did. But again, he didn't know. He couldn't, not unless I told him. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. I keep thinking he hesitated, searching for the words. If I had done things differently, maybe none of this would have happened. My hand stilled. That sentence. It brushed too close to the truth. But not quite. He wasn't thinking about the accident. He was thinking about his job, his relationship, his choices now. Still, the weight of those words felt familiar, heavy, dangerous. I wrote carefully. We all think that sometimes. He read it, then shook his head. No, you don't get it, he said. This isn't just sometimes. It's everything right now. He pushed off the counter, pacing slightly. I replay things over and over, every decision, every moment, trying to find where I messed up. No, you don't get it, he said. This isn't just sometimes. It's everything right now. He pushed off the counter, pacing slightly. I replay things over and over, every decision, every moment, trying to find where I messed up. My chest tightened, because that was exactly what I had tried to protect him from. That spiral, that endless loop of what ifs. If I had let him carry the full truth from the beginning, this would be worse. Much worse. I don't even know who I am without all of it. He admitted quietly. That stopped me, because that was deeper than anything he had said so far. This wasn't just about failure. It was about identity. And suddenly I saw it clearly. For years, Ethan had built himself around expectations. Success, control, being better, being enough. And now that those things were gone, he didn't know what was left. I stood up slowly, walked toward him. He stopped pacing, watching me. I wrote again, this time more slowly than before. You're still the same person. He frowned. No, I'm not. I held the page steady. You are. He shook his head. You don't understand. I met his gaze, and for a moment I wished more than anything that I could speak, that I could say his name, that I could remind him of who he used to be, not the version shaped by pressure or expectations, but the boy who sat at the kitchen table telling me everything without fear of judgment. But all I had was this. So I wrote again. You just lost things around you, not yourself. He stared at the words for a long time, longer than before, and I saw it again. That small shift, that hesitation. Like something inside him was starting to question the story he had been telling himself. You always do that, he said quietly. I blinked. He gestured toward the notepad. You make things sound simple. I tilted my head slightly, because to me it wasn't simple. It was just true. Maybe that's what I need, he admitted after a moment. Simple. A pause. Then, almost reluctantly, Chloe used to say, I overcomplicated everything. I didn't react, didn't write anything, just waited. She also said, I needed to stop being so emotional, he added. That one made something inside me tighten, because that was never who Ethan was. He had always felt deeply, thought deeply. That wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. But somewhere along the way, someone had convinced him otherwise. I wrote again. There's nothing wrong with feeling. He read it, then looked away. Maybe he said, but it doesn't seem to help much. No, it doesn't. Not always. But it matters. Even when it hurts. Especially then. We stood there in silence again. But this time, it felt different. Less tense. Less fractured. Not whole, but shifting. Healing doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it starts with something small. A single moment. A single thought. A single question. And I could feel it. Something inside Ethan was beginning to move. Slowly. Carefully. Like a door that had been closed for too long, finally starting to open. But I also knew something else. This moment wouldn't last forever. Because sooner or later, he would ask the question that mattered most. Not about his job, not about Chloe, not about his future, but about me, about the silence. And when that happened, I wouldn't be able to stay here, in this safe, fragile space between truth and misunderstanding. Because the truth was already waiting, and it wasn't going to stay hidden forever. The question came 3 days later. Not dramatic, not loud, just inevitable. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch that night after I visited, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something peaceful in his face. Not fixed, not healed, but quieter. I left before he woke up. Some habits don't change. I had always been the one who stayed in the background, making sure things were in place before he noticed. This time, I did the same. But 3 days later, my phone buzzed. A message. From Ethan. Not a short one. Not a casual one. A picture. I opened it, and my heart stopped. It was a document. A hospital record. My hospital record. The words blurred for a second as my mind tried to catch up with what I was seeing. Severe laryngeal trauma, vocal cord damage, permanent impairment likely. My hands began to shake. Below the image, there was a message. What is this? Just 4 words. But they carried more weight than anything he had ever said to me. I sat down slowly, staring at the screen. This was it. The moment I had been avoiding. The truth had found its way to him anyway. Because it always does. No matter how carefully you hide it. No matter how much you protect someone from it. Truth has a way of waiting. And then appearing when you least expect it. Another message came. You never told me. My chest tightened. No, I didn't. Because I thought I was protecting you. But how do you explain that now? The phone buzzed again. Is this why you can't talk? I closed my eyes. Tears filled them before I could stop them. Yes. But that wasn't the whole truth. Not yet. Another message. Why would you lie about this? Lie. The word cut deeper than I expected, because I had never thought of it that way. To me, it wasn't a lie. It was protection, love, sacrifice. But to him, it looked like something else entirely. Deception. I reached for the notepad automatically, then stopped. That wouldn't work this time. This wasn't something I could explain in a few written words, not something I could soften or simplify. This needed more. My fingers hovered over the phone. Then slowly, carefully, I started typing. I didn't lie to hurt you. I stared at the message, then added, I was trying to protect you. I sent it. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. I could feel his hesitation through the screen. What do you mean, protect me? There it was, the doorway, the line between everything he believed and everything I had hidden. I stared at the message for a long time. My heart pounded in my chest. Because once I crossed this line, there was no going back. No more silence. No more protection. Just truth. And consequences. My hands trembled as I typed again. That night, the accident, I stopped. Deleted it. Typed again. You weren't just there. Sent. The dots appeared again. Paused. Then, what are you talking about? Of course. He didn't remember. Not fully. That had been part of the reason I stayed silent. Because memory can be merciful. It can blur the edges of pain. It can hide the worst parts. Until something forces them back. I swallowed hard, then typed the words I had been holding back for years. You were driving. The message sat there. Delivered. Read. No response. Seconds passed. Then, minutes. My breathing became shallow, uneven. Because I knew what was happening on the other side of that screen. Pieces falling into place. Memories shifting. Gaps filling. And then, that's not another message came quickly after. That's not possible. Denial. Immediate. Expected. You said you slipped. I closed my eyes. Yes, I did. Because it was easier. Because it protected you. Because I couldn't bear to watch you carry that weight. But now that weight was coming back. And it would hit harder than before. You went back to the scene with me. I typed slowly. You were scared. You didn't want to stop. The messages sent one after another, each one pulling the truth closer to the surface. Another long pause. Then, oh my God, I felt the words like a physical impact. No. Another message. No physical impact. No. Another message. No. No, 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 no. And then the call came. I answered immediately. Mom. His voice broke, completely. What are you saying? I couldn't answer. Not the way he needed, but I stayed on the line, listening. I remember pieces he said, breathing heavily. The rain, the road, his voice cracked again. I thought it wasn't that bad. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my face. I thought we just hit something small. I didn't know. He stopped. And then in a whisper, I didn't know. I did that to you. The guilt came back. Stronger than before. Heavier. Because now, it wasn't vague. It was real. Clear. Defined. And I felt it immediately. The thing I had tried to protect him from. The thing I had carried alone. Now it was his too. I can't. He struggled to breathe. Why didn't you tell me? The question hit harder than anything else. Why didn't you tell me? Because I loved you. Because I couldn't watch you break. Because I thought silence would save you. But now silence had done something else. It had created a different kind of pain. A deeper one. I thought you were punishing me. He said, his voice shaking. All this time, I thought you hated me. That broke me completely. Because that was the one thing I never wanted him to believe. And yet, That's exactly what my silence had taught him. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, tears falling freely now. I wanted to say his name, just once, to break through everything. But I couldn't. All I could do was stay and listen, and finally let the truth be heard, even if it came too late. There is a kind of silence that feels peaceful, and then there is the kind that comes after truth. Heavy, unavoidable, irreversible. After that phone call, everything between Ethan and me changed again. But this time, it wasn't built on misunderstanding. It was built on something far more fragile, truth and the weight of it. He didn't call again that night. He didn't text. He didn't respond. And for the first time in years, I didn't reach out either. Because I knew what he needed. Time. Not to calm down, not to forget, but to process. To sit with something he had never fully faced before. The truth doesn't just land. It settles. Slowly. Painfully. Piece by piece. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I slept well, but because I hadn't slept at all. My house felt quieter than ever. Not the empty quiet from before, but something different. Something waiting. I made coffee out of habit even though I barely drank it. Stood by the window. Watched the same street I had watched for years. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Fear. Not fear of losing him. That had already happened in many ways. But fear of what the truth might do to him now. Because guilt, when it's real, doesn't fade easily. It grows. It consumes. And I had spent years trying to keep that from happening. But now it was out of my hands. Around noon, my phone rang. Ethan. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering, because part of me wasn't ready. But I pressed accept anyway. Mom. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Not broken, not panicked, just heavy, like every word carried weight. I stayed silent, listening. I didn't sleep, he admitted. Neither did I. I kept thinking about what you said. A pause. I kept trying to remember. My grip tightened slightly on the phone, and I think I do. My chest tightened, because memory doesn't come back all at once. It creeps in, details, fragments, moments that suddenly feel sharper than before. I remember the rain, he said slowly. I remember the road being slippery. I remember panicking. His voice faltered. And I remember you telling me to go back. Yes. You were calm, he continued. You weren't even mad. You just told me what to do. That was always how I handled things, even when everything inside me was breaking. I didn't want to listen, he whispered. No, you didn't. I just kept thinking about myself, he said. About what would happen to me if anyone found out. His breathing became uneven. And then you drove. A long pause, then softer, and you got out of the car. I closed my eyes. The memory hit me just as hard as it was hitting him. And then the headlights, he said. Silence. Then I didn't stop it. The words came out like a confession. Raw, unfiltered. I didn't do anything. That wasn't true. He had called for me. He had tried. But in his mind, it wasn't enough. And that's how guilt works. It rewrites reality. I just stood there. He continued, his voice shaking now. I watched it happen. Tears slipped down my face because I knew what he was feeling. That helplessness. That moment where everything moves too fast and you can't change the outcome. I hurt you, he said. Not a question, a statement, final, and for the first time, completely understood. I took a shaky breath, and even though he couldn't hear it, I let it out slowly. No, he added quickly. Not just hurt you. I changed your life. Yes, he did, but not in the way he thought. Because that night didn't just take my voice, it gave me something else, a choice, to protect him, to carry the truth, to love him even when it meant losing something myself. I don't know how to live with that, he admitted. That was the part I had feared most, not the truth itself, but what he would do with it. I don't know how to look at you and not think about it, he continued. Every time I hear you try to speak, every time you write something down, it's because of me. I closed my eyes again, because that was exactly what I didn't want him to believe. Yes, it was because of that night, but not in the way he was carrying it, not as blame, not as punishment, but as something that had happened, something we had both survived. I reached for the notepad, then stopped, because this time writing wasn't enough. Not for him, not for this. So instead, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I made a sound. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even close. Just a breath, forced through a throat that refused to cooperate. A broken, strained exhale that barely existed. But it was something. On the other end of the line, Ethan went completely still. Mom? I tried again. Another sound, rough, painful, but real. And then silence again, because that was all my body could give. But it was enough. Because in that moment, he understood something he hadn't before. That this wasn't something I could just stop. That this wasn't a choice. Don't, he said quickly, his voice breaking again. Don't try to do that. I closed my eyes, tears falling freely now. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. The apology filled the space between us. Not like before, not surface level, not out of fear, but real, deep, earned. And I felt something shift. Not the past. That couldn't change. But the way he was holding it. Because now, he wasn't running from it. He was facing it. And that was the first step towards something else. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. And maybe, eventually healing. After that call, something inside Ethan broke. But not in the way I had always feared. Not into something irreparable. Not into something lost. It broke open. The next time I saw him, he didn't call first. He showed up, at my door. It was early morning when the knock came. Soft at first, like whoever the knock came, soft at first, like whoever stood on the other side, wasn't sure they had the right to be there. I was already awake. I had been awake most nights since the truth came out. So, when I opened the door and saw him standing there, stood on the other side, wasn't sure they had the right to be there. I was already awake. I had been awake most nights since the truth came out. So, when I opened the door and saw him standing there, for a moment, I didn't recognize him, not because he looked different, but because of the way he carried himself. Gone was the defensive posture, the quiet distance, the subtle arrogance that had grown over the years. In its place was something raw, unprotected. His eyes were tired, red-rimmed, but clear, in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Mom! He said it softly, like the word itself mattered again. I stepped aside. Let him in. He didn't hesitate, didn't look around, didn't pretend. He just walked in like he used to, like this was still home, because in some ways it always had been. We stood there in the living room for a moment, facing each other, neither of us quite sure how to begin. Then suddenly, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, tightly, like he was holding on to something he was afraid to lose. I froze for just a second. Then slowly, I lifted my arms and held him back. And in that moment, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. He didn't let go right away. And when he did, he stepped back, wiping at his face quickly like he didn't want me to see the tears. But I had already seen them. I don't deserve that, he said quietly. I tilted my head. He gestured vaguely between us. This, you being here. Still caring. I reached for the notepad, wrote carefully. You're my son. He read it, then shook his head. That doesn't erase what I did. No, it didn't. But it also didn't define him the way he thought it did. He sat down slowly on the couch, his shoulders slumping. I keep thinking about that night, he admitted, over and over. I sat across from him, listening. Every detail I can remember, it's like it's getting clearer now, he said. And the more I remember, the worse it feels. That's how truth works. It doesn't stay blurry forever. I don't know how you lived with that, he said, looking up at me, knowing and not telling me. I paused, because that question deserved honesty, so I wrote, because I saw what it would do to you. He stared at the words. His jaw tightened. So instead, you let me believe you were punishing me, he asked. The pain in his voice was sharp, not angry, hurt, confused. I swallowed, then wrote again. I thought it was better than watching you blame yourself. He let out a bitter breath. Well, you were wrong. The words hung between us, heavy, true. Yes, I would have blamed myself, he continued. Yes, it would have been hard. He looked down, his voice quieter now. But at least I wouldn't have spent years thinking my own mother hated me. That one stayed, long after he said it. Because that was the cost of my silence. Not just his guilt, but his misunderstanding of my love. And no amount of good intentions could undo that. I nodded slowly. Because he was right. I had been wrong, not about loving him, never that, but about how I chose to protect him. Sometimes protection looks like distance, but sometimes it just creates more pain. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. I picked up the pen again. We don't fix the past. He read it, then looked at me. So, what do we do? I hesitated, because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't clean, but it was honest. We move forward. He stared at those words, like he was trying to understand them, or maybe accept them. Together, he asked quietly. I didn't hesitate. I nodded. And then I wrote one more thing. If you want to. He looked at that line for a long time. Long enough for something inside him to settle. Then slowly he nodded. I do. That was the first real step. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but choice. A conscious decision to stay, to rebuild, to try. The rest of that day passed quietly, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not avoidance, not distance, but presence. He helped me with small things around the house, fixed a cabinet door that had been loose for months, reorganized the kitchen without me asking. At one point, he even sat down at the table with me, really sat, not just passing through. "I forgot how peaceful it is here," he said. I smiled faintly, because that was something we had shared once, before everything changed. Later that afternoon, he picked up the notepad, turned it toward himself, and wrote something, then slid it across the table to me. I looked down. "I'm going to stay for a while, if that's okay." My chest tightened, not from pain, but from something else, something softer, something warmer. I looked up at him and nodded, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't running. He was choosing to stay. And maybe that was where healing really begins. Healing doesn't arrive like a moment. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a clear beginning or a clean ending. It happens in pieces. Small ones, quiet ones you almost miss if you aren't paying attention. Ethan stayed. Not just for a day. Not just for a visit. He stayed. At first, it felt unfamiliar having him back in the house again, hearing his footsteps upstairs, seeing him move through rooms that had felt empty for so long. But slowly, something began to shift. Not back to what we were. Because that version of us no longer existed, but into something new, something built not on assumption or silence, but on awareness. The first real change came in the mornings. Ethan used to rush through them grabbing coffee, checking his phone, barely present. Now he slowed down. He sat at the table. Actually sat. Not out of obligation, but because he chose to. One morning, he picked up the notepad before I could, wrote something, then turned it toward me. "Did you sleep?" I blinked. Because it was such a simple question, but it meant something deeper. He wasn't waiting for me to speak. He was meeting me where I was. I nodded. He watched me for a moment, then wrote again. "I didn't." I frowned slightly. "Why?" He hesitated before answering, then wrote slowly. "Still thinking about everything." Of course he was. Healing doesn't erase memory. It changes how you carry it. I reached for the pen, wrote carefully. "You don't have to carry it alone." He stared at that line for a long time, then nodded once. That became our new rhythm. Not silence filled with misunderstanding, but silence filled with effort, intentional, shared. There were still difficult moments. Of course there were. Healing isn't a straight path. One afternoon, I found him standing in the kitchen, staring at the stove, frozen. I approached slowly. He didn't move. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. I waited. "I was making coffee, and He stopped, swallowed. I remembered that morning. My chest tightened. The morning of the accident. The last normal moment before everything changed. I remembered how normal it felt, he continued. How nothing seemed wrong yet. His hands trembled slightly. And then I thought about how fast everything changed after that. I reached for the notepad, but before I could write anything, he shook his head. "No, don't," he said softly. I paused. He turned to look at me. His eyes were wet, but steady. "I don't need you to fix it," he said. "I just need to feel it." That was new. Before he ran from discomfort, now he was sitting in it, facing it. And that mattered. So I put the pen down, and instead, I stepped closer. placed my hand gently on his arm. He didn't pull away. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathed, and slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased. Not gone, but softer, more manageable. I used to think strength meant not feeling things like this, he said quietly. I tilted my head. He gave a small, sad smile. Guess I was wrong. Yes, he was. But that realization was part of becoming who he needed to be. Later that evening, we sat together in the living room. The same couch, the same space where years ago he used to lean against me and talk about everything. This time, it was different, but familiar in its own way. He picked up the notepad again, wrote something, then paused, like he was debating whether to show me. Finally, he turned it toward me. Do you ever wish that night didn't happen? I looked at the words, felt them. That question wasn't simple, because of course, part of me wished it hadn't. Wished I still had my voice. Wished he didn't carry this guilt. Wished things had stayed the way they were. But another part of me knew something else. That night changed everything. But it also revealed something. About love. About sacrifice. About what we were willing to carry for each other. I took the pen and wrote slowly. I wish you didn't have to hurt like this. He read it, then looked up at me. That's not what I asked. No, but it was the truth that mattered. I added another line. I don't regret loving you. His expression broke, not into pain, but into something deeper, something softer. He looked away, blinking quickly. You never stopped, did you? He asked quietly. I shook my head. Never, even when he thought I had. Even when my silence made him believe otherwise. Even when it cost me everything. Love doesn't stop. It changes. It adapts. It finds new ways to exist, even without words. That night, as we sat there in the quiet, something settled between us. Not perfect. Not complete. But real. The kind of connection that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like something missing. It felt like something shared, and maybe that was enough. There's a moment in every story when everything becomes clear, not because something new happens, but because you finally understand what was there all along. For us, that moment didn't come with a dramatic event. It came on an ordinary afternoon. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album he had found in the hallway closet. I hadn't opened that album in years. Not because I didn't want to remember, but because remembering had always been easier when I was alone. He turned each page slowly, carefully, like he was afraid of missing something, or maybe afraid of finding something. I watched him from across the room, silent but present, the way I had always been. Look at this, he said softly, holding up a picture. It was one of my favorites. Ethan, maybe 7 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, standing in the backyard with his arms stretched wide, like he was trying to hug the whole world. I smiled. He looked at me. You used to laugh a lot, he said. I tilted my head slightly. He studied my face. Even in pictures I can see it, he continued. You weren't loud, but you were warm. Warm. I felt that word settle somewhere deep inside me, because that was who I had always tried to be. Not the loudest, not the strongest, but the one who stayed, the one who listened, the one who loved quietly. Ethan set the photo down, then flipped a few more pages. And then he stopped. His hand froze on one image. I knew which one it was before he even spoke. The last photo we took together before the accident. We were standing in the kitchen. He had his arm around me, leaning slightly into my side, and I was looking at him. Not at the camera, at him, smiling. He stared at the picture for a long time. Then slowly he looked up at me. His eyes were different now, not filled with guilt, not overwhelmed, but understanding. "I thought you stopped talking to me," he said quietly. I held his gaze. "I thought your silence was punishment." I swallowed, because that belief had shaped so much of what came after. He took a slow breath, then reached for the notepad, wrote something, and turned it toward me. "Why didn't you ever tell me the real reason?" There it was. The question that had been there from the beginning. Not about the accident, not about the injury, but about the choice I made after. I picked up the pen, paused, because this answer mattered, not just for him, but for everything we had been through. Then slowly, carefully, I wrote, "Because I didn't want you to stop being yourself." He read it. His brow furrowed slightly. I continued writing. "You were kind, sensitive. You cared deeply." I glanced up at him briefly, then wrote again. "I was afraid the guilt would take that away from you." His expression shifted, softened. "I think it did anyway," he admitted quietly. That hurt, because it meant that despite everything I had tried to do, he still carried that weight. Just in a different way. But then he added, "But not in the way you thought." I looked at him. He leaned forward slightly. "For a long time, I thought you didn't care," he said. "That you had shut me out." He exhaled slowly, and that made me harder. I listened. Less patient, less understanding, less mine. His fingers tapped lightly against the table. "But now I get it." I stilled. He reached for the pen again, wrote something, then turned it toward me. "You didn't stay silent to punish me. You stayed silent to protect me." My chest tightened, because that was the truth, but not the whole truth. So I added one more line beneath his words. "And to teach you something." He read it, looked up. What he asked. I held his gaze, then wrote the final words I had carried for years to listen. He stared at the page, then back at me, and slowly something in him shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but deeply, because for the first time he understood my silence not as absence, but as presence, not as rejection, but as love. A different kind of love, a quiet one, a patient one, a painful one, but real. "I think I finally hear you," he said softly. Tears filled my eyes, because that was all I had ever wanted. Not for him to hear my voice, but to understand me, to feel what I couldn't say, to see what I had always been showing him, just in a different way. He stood up slowly, walked around the table, and this time when he hugged me, it felt different. Not like he was holding on to something fragile, but like he had found something he didn't want to lose again. "I'm here," he whispered. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, The silence inside me didn't feel like something missing. It felt complete, because he finally understood. And sometimes that's louder than any words could ever be. Some of the deepest wounds in life don't come from what was done, but from what was misunderstood. We often believe love should be loud, obvious, and easy to recognize. We expect it to come in clear words, in explanations, in reassurance we can hear and hold on to. But real love, especially the kind that endures through pain, is rarely that simple. Sometimes love is quiet. Sometimes it sacrifices without asking to be seen. And sometimes it chooses silence, not because there is nothing to say, but because there is too much at stake to say it. One of the hardest lessons in life is learning that people don't always love us in ways we immediately understand. And when we misinterpret that love, we create distance where there was once connection. We assume rejection where there was protection. We feel abandoned when in reality, someone may have been holding us up the entire time. But here's the truth: healing begins the moment we stop assuming and start listening. Not just to words, but to actions, to presence, to intention. Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who stay even when we push them away, misunderstand them, or fail to see what they've been carrying for us all along. And sometimes the greatest form of love isn't being understood right away, but being patient enough to wait until understanding finally comes. If this story touched you, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever misunderstood someone you loved, or felt misunderstood yourself? Share your story in the comments. Your voice might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe in stories that heal, that open hearts, and remind us what truly matters, don't forget to like and subscribe.